All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're talking about a really pivotal time in history, the story of how some truly visionary leaders in 19th and 20th century India started this long, tough fight to change a society that was just completely bound by tradition and inequality. It's an incredible story of courage, of change, and really a nation's difficult awakening.
And that brings us to the big question, the one at the very heart of all this. How does a society break its chains? I mean, how do you challenge norms that have been around for centuries, things people see as sacred, even when they're deeply, profoundly unfair? That's the journey we're about to go on.
So, to really get why this was such a revolution, we first have to understand the world it came from. We've got to go back to 19th century India and see what it was like to live in a society that was, well, truly in chains.
At the center of this struggle, you really had two majorly oppressed groups. For women, life was almost entirely confined to the home. We're talking no education, no property, no real freedom. And for what they called the lower castes, society was just a web of exclusion. They were shut out of everything, temples, schools, even wells, denied basic dignity at every single turn.
And when you look at the specifics for women, it's just brutal. This wasn't some abstract concept. We're talking about child marriage being completely normal, widows being cast out and forced to live a miserable existence. And then there was the horrifying practice of sati, where a widow was literally burned alive on her husband's funeral pyre. This was the reality these reformers were staring down.
And when it comes to the caste system, all of its cruelty was kind of distilled into this one single concept: untouchability. This wasn't just about social status, it was a system of total segregation. It was designed to dehumanize a whole group of people, barring them from public life entirely.
But in the middle of all this oppression, things started to change. A new way of thinking started to bubble up. So, in this next section, let's meet these voices of reform, the pioneers who actually dared to imagine a new India.
And here it is. This is the turning point. Against this incredibly grim backdrop, a few brave people just decided, no more. This is unacceptable. They started to question things, to write, to organize. They began to fight back. And they weren't fighting with weapons, they were fighting with ideas.
And this shows you that this was a battle fought on many different fronts. You had Raja Rammohan Roy, who brilliantly used ancient texts to argue against sati. Then there was Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who took up the cause of widows, fighting for their right to remarry. Jyotirao Phule saw education as the key to everything for both girls and the lower castes. And of course, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who came from an untouchable community himself, who would champion Dalit rights and go on to write India's constitution.
This quote, wow, it just perfectly captures what reformers like Phule and Ambedkar realized. They saw that these weren't a bunch of separate problems. The oppression of women, the cruelty of the caste system, it all came from the same rotten root, a society built on division. Their big insight was that you couldn't just patch things up. You had to rethink the whole system from the ground up.
So, okay, how did they actually do it? I mean, seriously, how do you take on centuries of tradition? Well, in our third section, we'll see they had a powerful toolkit, a combination of education, legal reform, and pure activism. These were the tools of their revolution.
This really breaks down their strategy into a pretty clear three-step playbook. Step 1, awareness. They wrote, they debated, they challenged old texts to just change the way people thought. Step 2, activism. This meant taking direct action, like opening schools for people who were shut out, or starting movements to build a sense of pride and solidarity. And then, Step 3, legislation. Turning all that social pressure into real, lasting change by getting new laws on the books.
But if there was one tool they believed in more than any other, it was education. It was the key. Look at these names: Jyotirao Phule and his wife Savitribai Phule, Pandita Ramabai. These were true pioneers. They opened the first schools for girls and for lower caste children, and they often faced incredible, sometimes violent opposition. They just knew a simple truth. It's pretty hard to oppress a mind that's been set free by knowledge.
And all that activism? It led to real concrete victories. You can see the dominoes fall right here on this timeline. In 1829, sati is finally banned, a massive win. Then, a couple decades later, thanks to people like Vidyasagar, widow remarriage becomes legal. And in 1929, another huge step, a law to stop child marriage. Each one of these laws was another crack in that old oppressive structure.
Okay, so what did all this struggle actually add up to? This was India's awakening, right? So in our final section, let's try to measure the incredible impact of all these efforts.
This chart gives you a pretty clear snapshot. You see that towering bar of social restrictions back in the 19th century, and then look how it gets cut down in the 20th. Now, was it perfect equality? No way. The goal of true equality was still way up there, but the progress was absolutely massive. The whole direction of society had been changed for good.
And this before and after is maybe the most powerful way to see it. It's like a scorecard. Every single injustice we talked about at the beginning was met head-on with a reform. Sati was practiced, then it was abolished. Widow remarriage was forbidden, then it became legal. Education for women was unheard of, then schools were opened. The caste system was rigid, then it was challenged by law. This is the direct result of their work.
So what's so important to get here is that they laid an entirely new foundation for society. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was a foundation built on justice and equality. For the first time, women's voices were starting to be heard in public. Education was starting to be seen as a right for everyone, not a privilege for a few.